Nirasya sarva sandeham ekikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vinashojjitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shashvat Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payo Rasho Muda Kedato Bande Bhagavatani Mananundavam Murdna Nipatyakshito Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvishe Nama Jayatam Surato Pango Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Param Bhojo Radha Madana Mohana Kulari Devatamar Madana Mohan Jar Sevak Raghunatha Rup Sanatan Jaya Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Dasa Raghunath Echai Goshai Kodi Charana Vandan Jaha Hoite Vignanasha Bhishta Puran Krishna Dasa Kaviraja Rasika Bhaktamaj Jai Rachido Caitanya-caritamrta Gaura Govinda Lila Shunite Gadai Shila Tahate Na Huelo Morachita Jeva Nahi Bhuji Keva Shunite Shunite Seha Kiad Bhuta Caitanya-carit Krishna Upajive Priti Janivera Serariti Shuni le borohoihit Shriyatam Shriyatam Nityam Giyatam Giyatam Mura Chintyatam Chintyatam Bhakta Caitanya-caritamrta. So by the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana Prayojana Avatar, Prema Purushottam, Karuna Maha Sagar, Shri Gauranga Maha Prabhu, and his beloved Parshad nourished by Shri Rup, Shri Sanatan, Shri Raghunath, Shri Jiva, an exalted skybird in the songbird in the inexhaustible sky of Gaura Lila, Srila Krishna Das, Kaviraj, Gosvami. Again today we will continue our discussion of Sri Caitanya-caritamrta. So we resume here in the Sanatana Shiksha. We're in the middle of discussion of this verse from the 10th canto, a statement of the Devas as praise to Bhagavan when he appeared in the womb of Devaki. And they've explained that those who follow the path of Gyan and reach the state of Jivan Mukti, but who reject Bhakti, do not become a fully purified intellect and are highly likely to cause offense to the feet of Bhagavan and thereafter be forced to fall from that state of Jivan Mukti. So we discussed numerous commentaries on this verse and statements of Sridhara Swami Pad, Jiva Gosvami Pad, Sanatana Gosvami Pad, Visvanatha Cakravarti Pad, and then also relevant is Cakravarti Pad's commentary on verses 18, 54 and 55 of the Bhagavad Gita, where he also discusses this verse and discusses also the relevant siddhanta to this passage and section of the Caritamrta. So last time we finished with discussion of Cakravarti Pad's commentary on 1854 in the Gita. So today I'd like to conclude this whole discussion that's been going on for a few sessions about why bhakti is the principle of ideya and why gyan devoid of bhakti is not acceptable, or not effective rather, as an avideya, by discussing finally this commentary in 1855 of Cakravarti Pad. And then we will put this topic to rest. After that we go more specifically into discussion of Krishna Bhakti and into the adhikar for this path, the levels that are attained in this path, etc. So I've shared the file a little bit earlier. Maybe if anyone can, maybe someone could share it again so that those who came later can also receive it. And I'm starting from the beginning of the Sarita Varshini on 1855. I've given a translation here. The Mool text is in the footnote. For the sake of time, I'm just going to read the translation. If anyone has questions on the Mool text, they're more than welcome to ask. So, the question then arises, well, as a result of that attained bhakti, that is, the bhakti said to be attained in the previous verse, or this param bhakti that was attained, and just as a recap, Chakravarti Pad gave a very nice analogy, saying that bhakti, in the case of a jnani using bhakti for the purpose of achieving moksha, that their bhakti was like a nugget of gold inside a sack of dal. So the little nugget of gold isn't easily distinguishable, or you might not realize it's there inside a stack of yellow dal. But if you cook the dal, then when all the dal dissolves, you can see, oh look, there's a gold nugget right here. So similarly, when that jnani uses bhakti to the point of cooking the dal, or so to speak, purifying the mind completely, then they'll find that that bit of bhakti is still present when the rest of these other elements are dissolved. And then, as Chakravarti Pad put it, there's the possibility that they can then achieve prema bhakti in that state of having a pure psyche, if they acquire the appropriate sadhu sangha. This is where he left it in the previous commentary. So in the commentary we'll get to today, he flushes out the different scenarios that can happen in this case. So that's why he's talking about the, quote, attained bhakti that was mentioned in the previous verse. So, I continue. Well, so a question is posed. As a result of that attained bhakti, what then shall become of him, that is, of the sadhaka who is described in the previous verse? Thus, by means of an artantarnyasa, or a description of a general principle by means of a particular case, he says bhaktya, that is, he speaks this verse. A jnani, or a bhakta of various types, knows me truly, he who is the referent of tat, in the celebrated statement, tattvamasi, in Chandogya Upanishad. So, in classical language, many times Brahman is just spoken of in commentary as tat parartha, or the referent of the word tat. So he's just talking about Brahman, but this is one way that it's typically referred to. So, Bhagavan is speaking as though to say, I am Brahman, I am the referent of tat. So a jnani, or a bhakta of various types, knows me, he who is the referent of tat, as far as I am and as to who I am, only by means of bhakti. As per my statement in the Bhagavad, I am attainable by means of one-pointed bhakti. Since this is such, the jnani under discussion, then, only by means of that bhakti, thereafter, tadanantaram, that is, only at the time of the termination of this jnani's knowledge, or vidya, comes to know me, and then enters me, that is, experiences the bliss of absorption in me. So what's being referred to here is the idea that those following the path of Gyan use Gyan as a means to achieve moksha, but once they are on the brink of attaining moksha, they give up even the process of Gyan that got them there. And the analogy is given like you take a boat to cross a river, once you get to the other side, you just leave the boat and carry on to where you're trying to go. So for Gyanis, both Bhakti and Gyan are like a means which is ultimately abandoned finally in the process of achieving the goal that they seek. So that's why he mentions here, at the time of the termination of the Jnani's knowledge. So when they get to the point of even leaving behind the knowledge that they've cultivated that's brought them to the point of reaching Sayujya, then they can enter me, or they can achieve Sayujya Mukti at that time. Because of my being beyond Maya and ignorances, or avidyas being Maya, I am knowable also by means of knowledge. Since indeed bhakti is heard of as being a function of knowledge, or vidya, in Narada Pancharatra. Quote, knowledge, vidya, is verily of 5 limbs: Sankhya, Yoga, Vairagya, Tapas, austerity, and Bhakti to Keshava. Thus, some fraction of bhakti itself, which is in actuality a function of the Ladini Shakti of Bhagavan's Sarup Shakti, has entered knowledge for the sake of the fruitfulness of that knowledge. That is, for the sake of making knowledge able to confer results upon those who cultivate it, since knowledge is unable to do so without the support of bhakti. So when it is said that this Gyani follows the path of Gyan and achieves moksha, he's saying actually inside that knowledge that they used to get moksha, there was a fractional presence of bhakti inside of that. Because bhakti is also classified as a type of knowledge, and if bhakti weren't there, it wouldn't have been possible for them to reach the point of achieving moksha anyway. It, that is bhakti similarly, enters karma yoga too for the sake of the fruitfulness of karma. Because of the statements in Shastra of karma, jnana, yoga, and so forth, being mere exertion, that is, fruitless labor, without it, meaning without bhakti. So we've discussed those statements in earlier comments. I'm not going to review them now. They were discussed in the previous class. Since nirguna bhakti is actually not a function of the knowledge or vidya constituted of sattva gun, knowledge possesses causality only on account of being a remover of ignorance, whereas bhakti alone does or possesses causality in regard to knowledge of the referent of tat. So he's making a distinction and saying, when we say that bhakti is also fractionally present in knowledge and can be called a type of knowledge, he's saying, but that type of knowledge that bhakti is sometimes able to be identified with is not the same as the knowledge that's a product of sattva gun. Because sattva gun can remove ignorance, or it can remove the presence of the lower gunas, but sattvic knowledge itself cannot produce the experience of Brahman. Whereas bhakti, because it is constituted of Sarup Shakti, it alone has the ability to lead someone to experience of Brahman, or, quote, the referent of Tat. Moreover, as per the Smriti, that is a statement in the Gita, quote, knowledge is produced from sattva. Knowledge produced by sattva is in itself called sattva. Thus, furthermore, as sattva is referred to by the word knowledge, so knowledge arising from bhakti is bhakti itself, and that itself is referred to sometimes with the word bhakti and sometimes with the word knowledge. So this is quite technical. He's basically just going carefully and establishing things point by point in order for it to be clear when these terms mean what it is that they mean, because he's saying bhakti and gyan are different, and bhakti is a type of gyan, and bhakti can be equated with gyan. So when and where he's using the meaning of these words in what sense, he's just trying to clarify that by giving these points. So thus, knowledge too is to be seen to be of 2 types. That is, that which is produced by sattva gun, and that which is produced by bhakti and is itself a form of bhakti. So where and when the word gyan is used, does that refer to the gyan that's a product of sattva gun? Does that refer to the gyan that's actually a fractional portion of bhakti? According to context, one has to be able to understand these things. In that regard, one should relinquish the first type of knowledge, that is, the type constituted of sattva gun, by means of the second type of knowledge, that is bhakti, am I missing a word here? one should relinquish the first type of knowledge, and by means of the second type of knowledge attain absorption in Brahman. This notion can be understood also from observation of the 25th chapter of the 11th canto. So he's referring back to the earlier statement where it's that a jnani should give up his knowledge in order to achieve moksha. So he's saying that type of knowledge that has to be jettisoned like the boat that you leave at the other side of the river, that's the sattvic knowledge, that's a product of sattvagun, not the knowledge that is actually bhakti, which is what is enabling you to have the perception of tatparartha, or Brahman. In this regard, some jnanis are seekers of sayujya solely by means of knowledge alone, verily without bhakti. They consider themselves jnanis, but affliction alone is their result, and they are certainly severely censured. Okay, so here is where he starts the final analysis of all these commentaries, and this is the point that's made in the Payar under discussion. The whole reason we're going through all this analysis and this citation from the Bhagavatam, etc., is because the previous Payar said that a jnani thinks, I've achieved Jivan Mukti, but in reality, their mind or their intellect does not become purified because they reject bhakti. So this is the category of jnani that statement refers to. The person who follows the path of jnana to the complete exclusion of any practice of bhakti. So he's saying here, those persons, the result of their efforts is the pain that they took to perform them. Meaning their efforts are fruitless and their approach is not recommended, or as he's saying here, severely censured. So now to preclude an excessively general understanding where we say, oh look, here the Caitanya-caritamrta says jnanis never achieve moksha, and then anyone who follows any Advaita Vedantic path, we start hitting them with this idea, then we end up becoming offenders to persons who are very worthy of respect and who may very well achieve moksha. So when we speak about a jnani, we have to be very precise in what we're saying. And is it a jnani who follows jnana to the exclusion of bhakti, or is it a jnani who integrates bhakti into their practice of jnana and achieves moksha? Or as we'll see finally, is it a jnani who integrates elements of bhakti into their sadhana, and then at the point of achieving Jivan Mukti, gravitates further towards bhakti and achieves a variety of shantarati, or a variety of an attainment that's principally that of a bhakta and less so that of a jnani. These are the different potential outcomes. So Chakravarti Pad will lay these out as we go. So in category 1 is the jnani who rejects bhakti. They don't get anything and they're censured. Others, okay, category number 2. However, knowing that mukti does not come about by means of jnana alone without bhakti, practice jnana mixed with bhakti. They consider Bhagavan's figure to be constituted of the gunas, because Bhagavan himself is supposedly, according to them, only an adjunct of Maya. And they attain even the state of being ascended in yoga, that is, being a Jivan Mukta. So now there's some people, they follow the path of Gyan, their goal is moksha, but they integrate bhakti, okay? But among them, he's going to make subcategories. So among these people who integrate bhakti into their Gyan sadhana, what's significant is how they conceive of Bhagavan. Do they conceive of Bhagavan as being beyond Maya, the master of Maya? Or do they conceive of Bhagavan as being a product of Maya who's under Maya? So he's saying the first case is those who conceive of Bhagavan as a product of the gunas, or within the frame of Maya. So that person can achieve Jivan Mukti by thinking that way. These Gyanis too, who consider themselves fully liberated, even though they're not, are certainly censured. Since it is said in this verse from the 11th canto that we've already discussed in previous classes, the 4 separate varnas, brahmana and so forth, are born from the face, arms, thighs, and feet of the Purush by means of the gunas along with the 4 ashramas. Those persons among those varnas and ashramas who do not worship and thus disrespect the Purush, the source of the self, Ishvara, become deviated and fall down from their position. The meaning of this verse is that those sannyasis who do not worship Bhagavan, but worship but also disrespect Bhagavan, fall down even though their ignorance, in the general sense, without reference to the nature of Bhagavan specifically, has been dispelled. In other words, even though they've achieved Jivan Mukti, because they don't worship Bhagavan, they don't achieve Atyantik Mukti, rather they again come back into the conditioned realm of samsara because of their disrespect for Bhagavan. So worshipping him is one thing, and conceiving him to be transcendent to Maya is another thing, and both are requisite to achieve liberation. Similarly also, it is said, and now he quotes, guess what? The very same verse of the Bhagavatam, which is cited here in the Caitanya-caritamrta, and which we've been discussing recently. O lotus-eyed one, others who consider themselves fully liberated, yet are not a fully purified intellect, because of having forsaken bhava for you, ascend with hardship to the highest position, meaning Jivan Mukti, but fall down from there because of their having disrespected your feet. Here in this verse, the word feet is intended to be used specifically because of bhakti to Sri Bhagavan. That is, the mention not of disrespect to Bhagavan, but disrespect specifically to the feet of Bhagavan, is made to imply that Bhagavan is most worthy of bhakti, since one falls down even as a result of neglecting to respect not just him in general, but only even his feet. Thus, quote, they by whom your feet have been disrespected, thus conveys that just fostering the mentality of the body of Bhagavan being constituted of the gunas is a disrespect of the body of Bhagavan, since it is said in Bhagavad Gita 9:11, quote, fools deride me as having donned a Mayak human form. In actuality, however, that human form of Sri Bhagavan is constituted solely of eternal being, consciousness, and bliss. Its being visible to people of the world occurs indeed only because of the influence of his incomprehensible potency of grace. Since it is said in a statement of the Narayana Dhyatma, quote, although eternally unmanifest, Bhagavan is seen by means of his own potency. Without that, who can see him, the Lord of paramount bliss? In this way, furthermore, even when Bhagavan's figure is determined as being constituted of eternal being, consciousness, and bliss, in the evidences of thousands of statements from the Shruti and Smriti, such as the Gopal Tapani Upanishad, quote, the embodiment of eternal being, consciousness, and bliss, seated at the base of a desire tree in beautiful Vrindavan. And Srimad Bhagavatam 3:21-8, where to Karama Muni, Bhagavan, quote, displayed his form of Brahman understandable only through sound, the Veda. So Chakravarti Pad is saying that Bhagavan's form, his human form, is Satchidananda. But some think that that human form is not Satchidananda. They think rather it's Prakriti. It's made of the gunas of Prakriti. It's part of Maya. And by thinking that, they cause disrespect to his form. So when it is said that those persons reach Jivan Mukti, but then because they disregard his feet, they fall down, he's saying that disregarding his feet refers to thinking he's made of the gunas, not recognizing him to be Satchidananda. That is a type of disregard, which leads to the fall down from Jivan Mukti of such Jnani sadhakas. So now the question will come up, if there are thousands of statements in the Shastra that are saying that Bhagavan is Satchidananda and not a product of the gunas, then why did these Jnanis insist that he is? These persons are not uneducated and they don't disregard or treat Shastra as trifling or superfluous. They're very serious about Shastra. So there must be some precedent in the Shastra for their opinion that Bhagavan is part of the gunas and not transcendental to the gunas. So now he shows a reference for that point of view. So he says, still, just by observing the statement in the Shaiteshara Upanishad 4.2, quote, know Prakriti to be Maya, and the great Ishvara to be related to Maya. Oh no, internet problem. Are you kidding me?
Recording in progress.
Okay, it came back. We seem to have been having repeatedly bad luck with the connection here the last few times. Haven't had any issues in the last couple of days with it. So let's see what happens. Hopefully we'll be okay. Anyway, so we're on this verse in the Shaiteshara Upanishad where he's citing a statement as a precedent for why persons following the Jnanamarg may form the opinion that Bhagavan is a product of the gunas and not transcendental to the gunas. So this statement says, know Prakriti to be Maya, and the great Ishvara to be related to Maya. So here you have the Upanishad saying that Bhagavan is related to Maya, or Bhagavan is of Maya. So on the basis of this statement, quote, they, the Gyanis who disrespect Bhagavan, think Bhagavan too is an adjunct of Maya. So now you might think, well, is that really what this statement means? And why would the Shastra say he's a product of Maya or he's related to Maya and that he's Satchidananda and all these other things at the same time? Quote, united with his own inherent eternal potency known as Maya, unquote, however, is the actual meaning of this statement, as per the statement evidenced in the commentary of Madhvacharya, quote, thus they say the eternal Vishnu is made of Maya. So in other words, when the Shaiteshara Upanishad says that Bhagavan is related to Maya, then the question is, which Maya? Does that mean Maya, the energy that's the basis of material existence? Or does that mean Maya in the general sense of a potency belonging to Bhagavan, which may not necessarily have anything to do with material existence? Which Maya is Bhagavan related to? So Madhvacharya is quoting this statement to say that the Maya referred to here is the Sarup Shakti. The Maya referred to here is Bhagavan's inherent eternal spiritual potency, not the potency that is of the world. So then you might say, well, then why does the first half of this statement say, no Prakriti to be Maya? Because isn't Prakriti matter? So we can say, no, not always. The word Prakriti, although it is used to refer to the subtle constituent from which what we can physically perceive to be conventionally known as matter is the base. In other words, although it's, quote, the imperceptible subtle material energy, the word Prakriti also has a broader meaning of simply being an original substance or simply being an energy. So it doesn't always in all cases refer to something mundane or refer to what is of the realm of samsara. It can refer to an energy or a, quote, original substance of any type according to the context of its usage. Just as even the word in English matter, which we think of, in the context of science to mean physical stuff or mundane stuff, in literature, the quote subject matter of a text, when you say the word matter in that context, it doesn't mean the same thing as it means in a scientific context. So the quote matter of discussion that we might have could be something spiritual, or the matter at hand could be anything. So similarly, the word Prakriti as well as the word Maya, according to context, can have many different categories of reference. So, more on this, he says, thus, here in Maya 2, that is, in this verse of the Shvetashvara Upanishad that Gyanis take to be evidence of Bhagavan being an adjunct of Maya, the inherent conscious potency, Chit Shakti of Sri Bhagavan, is referred to by the word Maya, and not rather the potency constituted only of the three gunas that is non-inherent in Bhagavan's person. This meaning of the statement in the Shruti, they do not consider. So he's saying they don't consider this idea, they just interpret it in the other way. Alternately, they also do not consider the other possible meaning of, quote, know Prakriti to be Durga, or Maya, and the great Ishvara, that is Shambhu, Shiva, to be related to Maya. So he's saying you could also say that the great Ishvara mentioned in the Shvetashvara Upanishad is Shiva, who's known to be related to Maya, meaning Durga, which would have no implication that Bhagavan or Vishnu is a product of the material gunas. So two interpretations are possible, whereby you don't end up with the conclusion that Bhagavan Vishnu is a product of the gunas. Therefore, although they have attained the state of being a Jivan Mukta, they fall down as a result of offense to Bhagavan, as stated in a statement from the Parishishta cited in the Vashana Bhasya, which we've heard quoted in all three of these previous commentaries. Even Jivan Muktas again enter bondage by means of karmas if they are offenders of Bhagavan, who is possessed of immense, inconceivable potency. Furthermore, when attainment of the result of their sadhana occurs, they consider that their sadhana is not suitable for their aim, that is, Sayuja Mukti. And at the time of relinquishing their sadhana of jnana, they relinquish jnana and the ancillary bhakti therein as well, and consider only their verily false, unmediated or aparoksha experience of Brahman to be worthy of fixing their attention upon. After the disappearance of their jnana along with bhakti, and as a result of offense to the blessed figure of Bhagavan, because they think he's a product of Maya, they certainly do not attain bhakti again, and because of non-experience of the referent of Tat, that is Brahman, without bhakti, because they rejected bhakti, they are known to be those who only think themselves Jivan Muktas, but whose meditation or samadhi is in vain. Again it drops. Why? We almost got through it.
Recording in progress.
All right. So then he cites the same verse that we're discussing now. I won't read the translation again. So that concludes the second category. Or in other words, the first category is the Gyanis who don't follow bhakti at all. They don't achieve anything. Now you have the Gyanis who follow bhakti up to the point of Jivan Mukti, thinking Bhagavan is product of the gunas, and then jettison bhakti and jettison that concept, that bhakti to that saguna Bhagavan, and jettison their gyan, and try or think that they can now be absorbed in this aparoksha anubhav, or this indirect meditation upon Brahman. But once they do so, in other words, once they jettison the bhakti that was what enabled them to get to that state, they can't retain that state, and they end up deteriorating back into various forms of mundane conditioning. So this is the second category. Now we come to two final categories. So he says, those other types of Jivan Muktas, however, who practice jnana mixed with bhakti, consider Bhagavan's figure to verily be constituted of eternal being, consciousness, and bliss, and attain supreme bhakti upon the gradual occurrence of the termination of ignorance and knowledge, are of two types. So now you have the Gyanis who follow bhakti and who don't disrespect Bhagavan because they do consider Bhagavan to be Satchidananda. So now he's saying these two type of Gyanis, there are two of this type of Gyani. So ultimately we get four categories. So he says, one type performs bhakti for the sake of attaining sayujya, has unmediated aparoksha experience of the referent of Tat, meaning Brahman, and ultimately attains Sayujya. They are certainly praised. Interesting, he says praised. Not that they're, hit upon as being hellish offenders and all of this. He's saying Gyanis are worthy of praise. And we see elsewhere Jiva Gosvami in the Sandarbhas, when he is discussing in the 7th canto a gradation in how all beings are honorable, he classes, insentient beings as one category, human beings as a higher category, Gyanis as a higher category from conventional human beings, and then Bhaktas as even more honorable than Gyanis. But what's noteworthy is that he specially distinguishes Gyanis as being specially honorable in comparison to people in general. And here, even these Gyanis who follow bhakti as a means to achieve Sayuja Mukti and do achieve Sayuja Mukti are considered praised. So even though they don't aspire for eternal bhakti to Bhagavan, at least they worshipped Bhagavan. At least they accepted Bhagavan was Satchidananda. And at least by his grace they got what they wanted. And if they achieve Sayuja Mukti, they're not bothering anybody. So let them be. We don't need to act, arrogant and superior to these kind of people and speak disparagingly of them. Let them be respected for what they do. Let their respect for Bhagavan and let Bhagavan's nature of giving people whatsoever it is that they want, let these things be respected. And if some bhaktas who are so profoundly absorbed in the sweetness of rasa feel such compassion for such people that they're only achieving Sayuja Mukti and not getting the chance to, experience these things, then I'll just say, that's wonderful, that's fine. Once you've reached that state of bhakti siddhi and you're tasting that rasa, then I'll be happy to hear your expressions of compassion for them. Until then, I think you do better to focus on your own bhakti than thinking that you're better than these Gyanis. Okay, anyhow, sorry to diverge from the topic. So the Gyanis who use bhakti as a means to achieve Sayuja Mukti but respect Bhagavan as Satchidananda achieve moksha. The other type, which is very fortunate, or rather the most fortunate type, relinquishes the desire for moksha by the influence of independent association of Shanta Mahabhagavatas. That is, great bhaktas of Sri Bhagavan who have Shanta Rati for Sri Bhagavan, and whose association comes to those Gyanis independently of its own accord, that is, as causeless grace upon those Gyanis, and become, like Shukadev and others, absorbed solely in relishing the sweetness of bhakti rasa. So this is the category that he referred to at the end of the commentary on 1854, where some of these Gyanis can mad bhaktim labate param, can then achieve this supreme bhakti or prem bhakti. So they can achieve it in this case if they respect Bhagavan as Satchidananda, they follow the path of bhakti integrated with Gyan to the point of achieving Jivan Mukti, and they get the association of the appropriate Mahabhagavatas. When all those elements come together, then that Gyani can become a Shanta Bhakta. They are certainly highly praised, since it is said in the Bhagavat, quote, even Atmaramas and sages who are free from entanglement engage in unconditional bhakti to He of tremendous power. Hari is possessed of such qualities. Thus, in this way, Gyanis are of 4 types. The 2 that are censured, that is, the first 2 aforementioned types fall, and the 2 that are praised cross over samsara. So, there you have it. Any comments or questions on all this analysis of why Krishna Bhakti is the principal abhideya and why, even to achieve success on the path of Gyan, Krishna Bhakti is necessary? Great, then I'll take that as an indication that the point is clear. So, we'll move on now. So, The following payar is as follows. Krishna Surya Samamaya Hoyandakar Jaha Krishna Taha Nahi Maya Radhikar. Krishna is like the sun, and Maya is like darkness. Where Krishna is present, there Maya has no jurisdiction. So this is quite a well-known statement, and this is stated to further the topic of why Krishna Bhakti is the Abhideya. As we discussed earlier, as with reference to the statement in the Gita, Ye Yatamam Prapadyante, Krishna said that only those who surrender to me cross over my Maya. So now the reasoning for that previously cited statement is being given here. Because where there is Krishna, there is no Maya. So unless you go to Krishna, you're not going to get out of Maya. So only by taking shelter of Krishna, or he wherever he is, there is no Maya. There you'll be free from Maya. So the commentary attributed to Chakravarti Pad, he gives a Sanskrit comment on this payar, which translates as follows. Thus he concludes the discussion of Krishna Bhakti being the principal Abhideya with two payars. The meaning is this: Maya cannot go near Krishna, thus one becomes liberated from the bondage of Maya just by taking shelter in him. Therefore, only bhakti to him is the Abhideya. This is the purport. So, now a verse in the Bhagavad is cited to give evidence for this idea that Maya is not there where Krishna is directly present. So this is stated as follows. Vilajamanaya yasya statum ikshapate muya vimohita vikatante mamaham iti dhurdiya. So it's not this verse alone is not a complete sentence. It's a following along from the sentence in the previous verse. So therefore, to complete the sentence, I've just given in a bracket a portion of what's in the previous verse. So this is Brahmadev speaking. He says, "Obeisance unto him, Bhagavan, thoroughly deluded by she who is ashamed to stand in whose purview the ignorant boast of I and mine." So those who are deluded by Maya, they boast of a false sense of self and a false sense of possession in relation to products provided by her that can never be their true self or truly belong to them. So she deludes jivas in this way, but the reason this verse is being stated is because it says that she is ashamed to stand in whose, meaning his, Bhagavan's purview. In other words, or Isha Pate would literally mean the path of sight or the line of sight. She doesn't want to come in the line of sight of Bhagavan. So when it's saying that where Krishna is present, there's no Maya, where there's light, there's no darkness. So where Krishna is looking, where Krishna is, Maya will not be there. So where will she be? We hear about that in the commentary. So I've given, this point is cited by Jiva Gosvami in the Tattva Sandarbha and discussed also in the Bhagavad Sandarbha. So I've just extracted the key points from those discussions that are relevant to the citation of this passage in this context, which is that why Maya is ashamed. In other words, the Caritamrta is saying where Krishna is present, she's not there. The Bhagavatam is saying she's not there because she feels ashamed. So why is she ashamed? If we don't know that, then we don't really know the meaning of what the Caritamrta statement is talking about. So this is what Jiva Gosvami explains in the Sandarbhas. So Jiva Gosvami explains two reasons for Maya's being said in the verse to feel ashamed to stand in the purview of Sri Bhagavan. Number one, Maya, who is constituted of tamas and the other gunas of Prakriti, feels herself to be deficient in comparison to Sri Bhagavan, whose essential nature is constituted of condensed eternal being, consciousness, and bliss. So in other words, if you show up at, a fine dinner party, very poorly dressed, you might feel a little shy. So if you show up and, you're in the midst of, a bunch of elegant swans and you're just a, dirty brown duck, you're not feeling quite so wonderful in the midst of all these people. So something like this, when Bhagavan is the condensed embodiment of eternal bliss and consciousness, and Maya is sitting there with her, tamas, her rajas, and so forth, she's feeling a bit shy, like she's not fit to be right front and center. This is one sense, and the second sense is perhaps more significant. He says, Maya knows that her activity of deluding jivas by covering over their essential nature and causing them to identify with a false sense of self is not pleasing to Sri Bhagavan, who desires that jivas have intentness or sammukhya upon him, which is, as we've discussed, fundamentally the avideya of the Shastra. Yet, she still does this because she cannot tolerate jiva's beginningless obliviousness of Sri Bhagavan. So again, the obliviousness of Bhagavan is conceived to not be an effect of Maya's bewilderment of the jiva, but rather to be its cause. All of this being beginningless and not having any, quote, original cause, but it's not that you can blame Maya for the jiva not being aware of Krishna. The jiva in its constitution doesn't have any such awareness. When such jivas beginninglessly are not favored with that awareness by the Sarup Shakti, then the Maya Shakti causes them to falsely identify with a false sense of self. So why? Then, more broadly, it's explained that she does this to perpetuate the jiva seeking the shelter of the Sarup Shakti. In other words, unless the jiva gets the support of the Sarup Shakti, the jiva will have no ultimate experience of Bhagavan. So unless the jiva is prompted by some suffering or something that forces it to get out of the state that it's in, it won't act such that it can then be blessed by the Sarup Shakti. So in that sense, in a very broad sense, even the effect of Maya or the suffering caused by Maya is part of the welfare or the ultimate journey towards satisfaction or ultimate attainment that a jiva is on. So there's a little bit more about this here, but there's a couple sentences before that. So Jiva Gosvami gives these two explanations. Chakravarti Pad adds a little color, as he often does, by saying the following. Sri Chakravarti Pad adds that Maya thus remains as though at the back of Sri Bhagavan. In other words, the verse is saying she doesn't come in the line of his sight. So he's saying, so what does that mean? It means she's behind. She's not in the purview. And he colors this by saying, like an ashamed woman thinking he knows my trickery. In other words, when you know that someone else knows the nonsense that you're up to, then you're keeping your distance, you're nervous in front of them. Something like this is how he characterizes it. But, I didn't give it here, but it's interesting that Jiva Gosvami, in the following statement in the Tattva Sandarbha, from these two, one of the points that I cited here, he also uses this interesting language by saying dakshinyam langitam na shakyate, or na shoknuti, I forget exactly, which says that it literally would come out to something like, even though Maya is bewildering these jivas, Bhagavan doesn't overstep decency in this regard, or he doesn't interfere with what she's doing. Even though it's not pleasing to him, in other words, he wants them to be aware of him, and she's acting so that they're not aware of him. Even though that's the case, he doesn't overstep the courtesy, he doesn't overstep the, he doesn't withdraw his favor from allowing her to continue doing what she's doing. So, if you put those, maybe I'll add this later, so Chakravarti Pad is saying she's hiding in the back thinking he knows I'm a trickster. But at the same time, Jiva Gosvami is saying, even though he knows, he's also not stopping her. He's also okay with that. So, with that in mind, this distance maintained by Maya from Bhagavan can be considered on the reason what is that? I mean, there's a word wrong there. The Maya Shakti is also referred, sorry, I've got a mistake here. The Maya Shakti is also referred to as the Bahiranga Shakti, that is the external potency of Sri Bhagavan. So, we discussed this point about the Bahiranga Shakti earlier in chapter 20, to say that Maya is not in with Bhagavan, not even in front of him, but external and behind. This is also another way of understanding, or another reason for why she's described as this outer Shakti. So now let's put this in context with the flow of thought here in the Caritamrta. Maya is therefore said in the previous payar to have no jurisdiction where Krishna is present, just as darkness has no standing in the presence of light. Prior to this citation of Srimad Bhagavatam 2.5.13, some editions of CC also cite Bhagavatam 2.7.47, and in this verse Maya is described using the exact same word, vilajamana, ashamed, to be in the purview of Bhagavan and thus remain afar from him, according to Sridhar Samipad's interpretation. Sri Jivapad, however, interprets this phrase to mean that Maya feels ashamed even to remain in the presence of Jivan Muktas who are intent upon Bhagavan, and thus recedes afar from them. So it's just like a yatra, it's just an indefinite pronoun. So it could be interpreted to refer to Bhagavan, or Jiva Gosvami interprets it to refer to Jivan Muktas. Both are grammatically possible. So as she's shy to come in front of Bhagavan, Jiva Gosvami is saying she's also shy to come in front of those who are fully endowed with awareness of Bhagavan. All of these comments further underscore that Maya's only purpose and Sri Bhagavan's only wish is that jivas in samsara attain intentness or sammukya upon him. And all of Maya's functions in regard to the jiva, or should that be plural, to jivas who lack this, can ultimately be seen as means by which this intentness upon Bhagavan becomes fortified. So this is the point. And there was another statement of Jiva Gosvami from the Krama Sandarbha in the 11th canto that we discussed previously related to Bhayam Dvitiya Bhiniveshata Syat, which said the same point, that there's no maliciousness on Maya's part whatsoever. She's only doing this as a task, feeling bound to do it and ashamed for doing it. And so soon as she sees that some jiva is imbued with Sarup Shakti and full of awareness and bhakti for Bhagavan, what to speak of trying to torment him or harm him or being opposed to him, she's afraid to even disturb him at all. She's keeping aloof from such a person. So then you might say, well then why do we always hear that, bhaktas and sadhus are tested in so many ways by Maya? So that testing is actually strengthening. Those are not Maya's, maliciousness or inimical behavior towards anyone. That's rather the necessary process by which the bhakti or the awareness of Bhagavan becomes condensed and becomes fully integrated into the psyche of the sadhaka. So we need not think of that as being negative in any manner, but rather ultimately supportive. Just as, a coach might push on the back of some athlete while he's doing his push-ups or something like that. It's not because he's trying to, disturb the person, it's because he's trying to inspire the person and make him stronger. Something like this. Alright, well from here, then we come into the discussion of Sharanagati and how this concept is applied. If Maya is not present where Krishna is present, then what do we need to do? We need to live in Krishna's presence. We need to take shelter in Krishna. When we take shelter in the place where Maya is absent, then what happens? We become free from Maya. We're no longer in Maya because we're in the place where she can't enter, where she's afraid to even come in front. So from here, we get discussion of taking shelter in Bhagavan, and then further discussion of how activity in that shelter, namely bhakti, is performed. So let's stop here for today, and in the next class we will dive into that. So if anyone has comments, questions, corrections, or feedback of any other type, feel free to share. Yes.
Yes, thank you for class today. I had a question related to that, the last couple of minutes of the discussion. So I was wondering, if one aspires for Krishna Bhakti, is it considered recommended to pray to the goddess Durga to lift us up and drop us off at the feet of Krishna? I was thinking like about the testing and stuff. It sounds like Maya can sometimes become she may still, for an aspiring bhakta of Krishna, she may still be involved in some manner in testing, which is actually beneficial for the sadhaka. So is it better, obviously we should pray to Krishna for bhakti, but is it also recommended to pray to the goddess Durga? Or am I understanding correctly the goddess Durga is closely related to Maya? Or maybe there's two different goddesses there that we should pray to? Or
Well, as we'll see in the very next statement here in the Caitanya-caritamrta, the advice is given to pray to Krishna, I am yours, and that Krishna will, thereafter take one into his guardianship and bring or facilitate the process whereby that jiva can be free from Maya. So we can say it's not essential to pray to Maya, to take shelter in Krishna, to pray to Krishna. This is complete and all effective. This is the general principle. But it may be observed, by some, not as a compulsory feature, but by, cultural sanskar or by personal interest, if it may so exist. When you're in India, places where Shakta worship is well integrated into the culture, there are sometimes instances where you end up visiting temples of Devi or in homes or, various times, or from your upbringing, some people may have that as part of their family culture. So to offer respect to Maya Devi or Durga Devi as a vibhuti, this is something Jiva Gosvami also talks about in the Sandarbhas, that the devatas can be respected as adhishtanas or dwelling places of Bhagavan, as well as vibhutis, or recognized as expressions of Bhagavan's magnificence or expressions of his greatness, persons who are performing particular functions or wonderful tasks on his behalf. So in that respect, there is a place for showing, respect and honor. And if one, in the course of doing so, wishes to so also pray, recognizing her to be a Vaishnavi and praying to her for, in the interest of going forward on one's path of bhakti, it may be admissible if that's of the way that someone has been trained or schooled, so to speak. But that it's compulsory or that we're here to promote that, no, simply following the bhakti sadhana as it's taught here, and keeping it, you could say, efficient and focused. This will be ideal, but according to circumstances, according to individual orientation, it's also not inadmissible.
Thank you.
Yes, I see another hand.
I guess it's mine. Pranam Dhanavajra. Can you give me some understanding? Because I have trouble to understand how bhakti helps karma yogis and jnanis. From what I understand, bhakti is a conscious choice. But in one of the definitions of the second group of jnanis, you read, it's basically the bhakti is some kind of, it happens that it's there in the process. And they may choose some of the items of bhakti to include in the sadhana. And I was wondering, if you don't aim towards bhakti, why would you choose bhakti? Since bhakti is a conscious choice, it's not an accidental or just happen by the way item that would just you include and shovel under your items of your particular sadhana, like karma yogis. How would they use bhakti if they don't aim to the Loka Vaikuntha, but just heaven? You know, karma yogis, the aim is to go to heaven, enjoy eternal life. And Jnani's objective from very beginning is just to obtain, it's not bhakti, definitely not. So if the bhakti is not final goal, how bhakti can help them in the sadhana? That's my question.
So Jiva Gosvami explains in the Bhakti Sandarbha that bhakti has bostu shakti. It has inherent capacity to purify. And that power works over those who perform acts of bhakti, even unknowingly and unintentionally. As in the case of performing, namabhas, or he gives the example of a rat, accidentally trying to get a ghee wick out of its mouth in front of a deity and writhing in pain, trying to get the flame off of its teeth. But it was as if the rat was waving the ghee wick in front of the Thakur and was benefited as if it had done puja. So various examples like this are given. The story of Shivratri, how this king spends the whole night up in a tree, hiding from a tiger, upset and crying in the dark, and unbeknownst to him, his tears are falling on a Shiva lingam, and the tree that he's hiding in is a bale tree, and he knocks some of the bale leaves off of the tree, so he ends up bathing the Shiv Thakur with bale leaves and his tears over the course of the night. So he gets the kripa of Mahadev unknowingly, just by having done this puja without any intention of doing so. So these are various examples of how it's explained that bhakti has the power to purify and to benefit even those who perform it unintentionally. So in the case of these jnanis or these karmis, as Chakravarti Pad gave this example of like the hidden gold nugget in the doll, they may not even be aware that they're doing bhakti, but there is a trace of bhakti in what they're doing. For example, someone might read the Bhagavad Gita, might take up the path of karma yoga, and practice nishkam karma yoga. However, in the course of doing so, they're also showing respect to Bhagavan by chanting his teachings of the Gita. That's also a type of praise. That's also a type of worship of Bhagavan, to worship his Vani, to put his Vani into practice. Even though their aim, even though their practice is karma yoga, there's some, as he said, an ancillary fractional presence of bhakti inside of that practice of karma. And that has a purifying influence over them. So their interest will guide the ultimate aim that they seek, and they may have greater or lesser understanding of how much of what they're doing is related to bhakti or not. But from our, so to speak, bhakti perspective, we'll look at it and see how the threads of bhakti are running through what it is that they're doing. Does that clarify the matter?
Yes. In the case of those unconscious acts, those are examples from Puranas. I think Bhakti Sandarbha gives some of the examples. But those are unconscious acts. And I understand that jnanis may use some unconscious, you mentioned an example of studying Gita, certain chapters. But in the case of a very particular, I'll call it, the objective or sadhana, so because a jnani, yogi, also karma yogi, they have very particular sadhana to follow. It's not as random, accidental, or by chance, by this, by that. They're very structured in their process. You can obtain fruit of karma yoga or jnana yoga without following the very, very strict sadhana. And actually it's stated, Jiva Gosvami explained that this sadhana of those are only active or potential until the point of obtaining their objective, after which the sadhana dwindles. After they obtain their objective, the sadhana dwindles, becomes unimportant. And compared to bhakti, is that bhakti sadhana is also an object of bhakti. So basically bhakti, whatever bhakta does through sadhana, is the fruit of bhakti, and by obtaining the fruit of bhakti, it still continues bhakti. So what I'm trying to say is that how they can, karmic jnana yogis, have bhakti included in their sadhana, and from my understanding, it may be some unconscious choice, but in some ways it is conscious because it's a part of sadhana.
Okay, can I jump in here?
Yes.
So I gave the example of unconscious acts as like a type of kaimutyanaya. In other words, if even unconscious acts have this effect, then when they consciously integrate acts of bhakti, then definitely they, are affected by having performed them. So in the case of jnanis, they, do ritual puja of vigrahas of Vishnu or Shiva or Krishna every single day. How many stotras did Shankaracharya write? How many stotras have so many great, Advaitavadis written in praise of various devatas? The Bhagavan Nam Komudi that we're seeing quoted here in the Caitanya-caritamrta and the Padyavali, it's by Lakshmidhar, who is a famous, follower of the Advaita Marg, who were in those eras some of the greatest proponents of Harinam Sankirtan. So Gyanis perform, in the modern day, a very prominent person like this was Sitaram Umkarnath. So Gyanis perform Harinam Sankirtan profusely. They praise Harinam Sankirtan profusely. They do daily ritual worship with great expertise of, Jagannath. How many of the Pandas in the Jagannath temple are, followers of Shankaracharya's school of thought? Practically all of them. So there's like thousands and thousands of examples of how persons following the path of Jnanamarg integrate bhakti into their path and do so in an intentional, conscious way. And for them, it's very simple. It makes perfect sense. You worship Ishvara, and by the Ashirvad of Ishvara, you attain moksha. So, by doing all of these things, they, reap the benefit or the purifying effect of these practices of bhakti in the interest of the goal that they have.
So wouldn't bhakti be, since bhakti is more powerful than karma and jnana, wouldn't that bhakti items they include in the sadhana, wouldn't make them bhaktas?
we just read these commentaries, which exactly explains that point. I don't know what more I can say. Unless they acquire the sadhu sangha of a bhakta, it doesn't happen. And bhakti can purify the psyche, but unless they get the association of a bhakta, they won't have any concept or any taste or any samskar for bhakti in and of itself, apart from the fundamental orientation or vasana that's already in their psyche. Unless from a previous life they had a bhakti vasana, which is then, nurtured by that engagement in practices of bhakti in the present life. And you do hear stories of persons who were, following an Advaitic path for some time, but then after some period of practice and purification, then they took in greater interest in the path of bhakti. That there are cases of that. So it's all either based on a previous samskar or the acquisition of the appropriate association.
That's it. Okay. Okay, that clarifies. Thank you. I missed the point. Thank you.
Great. So let's conclude here for today. And if we're so blessed, next week we'll continue our discussion and we'll enter into the topic of Sharanagati. So, Vaishnavebhyo Namo Nama. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe.
Jai Shri Krishna.